Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Appreciate seeing you in that chair. It's good to have a Cory represented and presiding over the United States Senate. Sir, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
I appreciate that very much, sir. You know, I rise today to speak against an amendment that is now pending to this bill that would block a rule that seeks to fulfill the promise of the Fair Housing Act. This is an issue actually that's very deeply personal to me and one that really has defined my own personal history. I'd like to start by telling a story. When about 1969, just 1 year after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, there was a couple here in Washington, D.C., married with 2 boys that decided to move to New Jersey. And in New Jersey, they encountered a lot of what was called a practice called real estate steering, where black couples were steered away from certain neighborhoods. They grew frustrated, realizing that they were being steered away from white neighborhoods, and they sought the help of the Fair Housing Council. And they set up an elaborate sting operation where my parents would go look at a home, or this couple would go look at a home, and they would then be followed by a white couple. If the couple was told that the house was sold or not for sale, the white couple would then appear and find out if that was indeed true. And most often for this couple from Washington, D.C., yes, they would find out the house was still for sale. And eventually, this couple found a house in a small town called Harrington Park, New Jersey, that they loved, but they were told that the house was not for sale. They were told that the house had been pulled off the market or sold. And they left, and the white couple came behind them, and lo and behold, the house had not been sold or was not pulled off the market. And the white couple pretended as if they loved the house like the black couple did and put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted, and on the day of the closing, instead of that white couple showing up, the African-American gentleman from the black couple and a volunteer lawyer came to confront the real estate agent. The real estate agent, in fact, was so upset that he stood up and punched the lawyer representing the black couple and sigged the dog on the African-American man. But yet the law was on their side. The fair housing law of the United States of America, law from the federal government, was on their side. And eventually that black couple and their 2 kids moved into that home in Harrington Park, New Jersey. That was 1969. It was the year I was born. And that couple were my parents, Cory and Carolyn Booker. That's my origin story. Legislation that this body passed empowered my family to move into the home of their dreams in an all-white neighborhood with incredibly good schools that I went through from K through 12. I am the beneficiary of work that this body did to ensure that our American values are preserved, to make sure our values of inclusion, of integration, to make sure fair housing is the law of the land. That work gave me my start in life. It defined my path. The activism of local activists combined with the law of the land is passed by us. And so after decades of struggle in communities across the country, we have largely been successful in banning overt housing discrimination. We should be proud of our work. But that legislation that we passed should not become a relic of history. It's not something for us to turn and admire. We all know on many issues, the cause of freedom, the cause of justice necessitates constant vigilance. And so I rise today with the knowledge that while major pieces of civil rights legislation, like the Fair Housing Act, have had a significant impact on millions of Americans, white and black, Latino, Asian, disabled, it's had a full impact. We still have work to do to continue that vigilance to make sure that those values, those ideals, and the law of the land is made real for families. For nearly 50 years, unfortunately, there's not been real guidance or direction or tools to help local officials achieve the goals of the Fair Housing Act, which is integrated housing, fair housing, equal access. In 2010, in fact, the Government Accountability Office found that the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, failed to properly administer oversight obligations under the Fair Housing Act and failed to monitor its guarantees for compliance with the law. So in 2013, HUD proposed affirmatively furthering fair housing, a new rule that would seek to fulfill the promise of Fair Housing Act and eliminate a lot of the historic patterns of segregation that still go on in America today. The vision for the rule is to institute a data-driven analysis of localities and develop federal grant programs for housing and economic inclusion. When I was mayor, people came to me with passions and accusations and the like, but I used to always say, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. It's important to look at the numbers to know what really is going on. And so HUD brought about this idea of making sure we have that data, not in a rushed process. The administration engaged in a diligent 2-year rulemaking process with public inclusion, participation from others, lots of public comment periods, and finalized that rule in July 2015. Now, it's unfortunate right now that one of my dear colleagues, somebody who I value very much because we do a lot of work across the aisle, but he's introduced an amendment that would block this rule's implementation. And I must respectfully disagree with the intent of this amendment. The Fair Housing Act and really the entirety of the Civil Rights Act were meant, again, to be real today, not just relics of yesterday. They were meant to be guideposts and standards by which we hold ourselves accountable for the values that we put forth. This affirmatively further fair housing rule is a measure of accountability for HUD and for ourselves. You cannot change what you cannot measure. Let me say that again. I learned this as a manager. If you can't measure it, you can't change it or affect it. The rule will arm communities most in need with knowledge and numbers so that they can make the most. They can make intelligent local decisions and best apply their resources. It's what everyone who has to manage something needs, accurate data. It will improve the access of quality data on local demographics and streamline the process for analyzing local fair housing impediments, helping grantees establish their own local fair housing priorities. This rule does not interfere with local zoning or housing laws, and it prevents further taxpayer dollars from being used to discriminate. Every stakeholder, every one of us, is afforded an opportunity to comment on the rule that HUD made. And as a local leader, a former local leader, it empowers people at the localities to do justice by their communities. This is a balanced and it's a measured rule. And it takes up the cause of the work to make our country more and more just. So I know personally that so much of the character of our country comes from the values we have as a whole. There are rare times in our history where this body is called upon to affirm those values. This body's history, the noble history of this body, is something I've benefited from personally around fair housing. And now we have more tools necessary with big data and analysis to more effectively, affirmatively assert our values and ensure injustice is not being done. I want to make sure that we defeat this amendment for those reasons. I believe and know the values of my colleague who proposed this. I do not think it achieves the end that we want to see by disempowering people to try to help families like mine. I was a child in DC moving to New Jersey and found justice, found a pathway towards integration. Indeed, I doubt I'd be here right now if it wasn't for the laws of our land. I hope that we can defeat this amendment and ensure that our nation becomes more fair and more just, and that more families like mine can find the America that we hail when we pledge allegiance to the flag and say that we are a nation of liberty and justice for all. Mr. President, thank you very much. And yield yet, Mr. President. I want you to know I will not yield. Mr. President, I would like now to ask unanimous consent that the time during the quorum calls be charged equally, fairly, like fair housing, fairly to both sides.